Hillman sets a screen, rolls to the basket.
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. Shan Carter is gone. Not suspended. Not benched for few games.
Gone.
The WNBA did not simply issue a fine, release a carefully worded statement, and move on to the next headline. They made a decision that sent shockwaves through locker rooms, front offices, television studios, and fan communities across the country. In a league where discipline is usually measured, progressive, and wrapped in formal language about conduct detrimental, this felt different. This felt final. One moment, just a few seconds long, became the tipping point for a career that had taken 6 years of sweat, sacrifice, and relentless work to build. And when that moment came, it came fast.
No dramatic build-up.
No slow escalation visible to the casual viewer. Just a shove, a fall, and then a silence that seemed to stretch far beyond the hardwood. It happened during a regular season matchup between the Indiana Fever and the Chicago Sky, a game that, on paper, looked like just another date on a long schedule. But this wasn't just another game. Not anymore. The league had been riding a wave of unprecedented attention. Attendance numbers were climbing. Television ratings were surging to levels not seen in nearly a decade. Jerseys were selling out. Social media clips were racking up millions of views within hours. The spotlight was brighter than it had been in years, and every possession carried a weight that extended far beyond 2 points on the scoreboard. At the center of that spotlight stood Caitlin Clark, the rookie whose arrival had altered the economic and cultural landscape of the league almost overnight. She wasn't just scoring. She was orchestrating. She was threading passes through impossible windows, pulling up from distances that forced defenders to question their own scouting reports, and commanding defensive attention that bent entire game plans out of shape. Every time she touched the ball, the arena leaned forward. Every time she crossed half court, defenders tightened. On this particular night, she was in rhythm, calm, precise, and confident. Indiana was building momentum, and Chicago could feel it slipping. Frustration in professional sports rarely appears all at once. It builds possession by possession. A missed rotation here, a late closeout there, a deep three that silences your home crowd or ignites the opponent's bench. You could see it in Chicago's body language. Shoulders sagging just slightly longer after each whistle. Glances exchanged between teammates that carried more tension than communication. The Fever weren't just winning stretches of the game. They were dictating terms. They were making Chicago react instead of initiate. And when a team is reacting instead of controlling, emotions start to run closer to the surface. Then came the moment that would redefine everything. There was no loose ball. No scramble under the rim. No hard foul in the middle of an obvious basketball play. Clark had just released the ball and was moving up the court when Kennedy Carter closed the distance from behind. It wasn't a bump in traffic. It wasn't incidental contact while fighting through a screen. It was direct, forceful, intentional. Carter lowered her shoulder and delivered a shove that sent Clark crashing to the hardwood. The sound of sneakers on wood was replaced by the sharp echo of impact. And then came the silence. It wasn't the loud outrage that typically follows a flagrant foul. It wasn't immediate booing or explosive shouting. It was a collective intake of breath. Thousands of people, frozen in disbelief, trying to process what they had just seen. Players on both benches paused mid-step. Coaches stopped mid-sentence. Even the officials seemed momentarily suspended in time before the whistle finally pierced the quiet. The replays began to roll almost instantly. Slow motion, different angles, zoomed frames. Each view told the same story. There was no basketball justification.
No defensive misread. No accidental entanglement.
It looked deliberate. Veteran analysts courtside didn't dance around it. They called it what it appeared to be: unnecessary, avoidable, and outside the spirit of competition. In a league fighting to cement its moment of mainstream recognition, this wasn't just a foul. It was a headline waiting to explode. But here's what made the aftermath even more shocking.
She is so good at extending and using that length to pressure.
The league's response was swift and severe. There were no prolonged public investigations stretching across weeks. No endless speculation about whether intent could be proven. The decision came down like a hammer. Carter wasn't merely disciplined. She was removed. The message wasn't subtle. It was unmistakable. This would not be tolerated. And that's where the deeper story begins. Because insiders had been whispering for months that tensions were rising beneath the surface. The league's rapid growth had changed internal dynamics. Veteran players who had carried the league through years of lower ratings and limited national attention suddenly found themselves sharing the stage with rookies who arrived with built-in fan bases and multi-million-dollar endorsement deals. Locker rooms that once felt stable were now navigating shifting hierarchies. Media coverage that used to be evenly distributed across teams began to orbit around a handful of magnetic names. For some, it was exciting. For others, it was destabilizing. There had reportedly been closed-door meetings earlier in the season, heated exchanges after games, frustrations voiced about officiating, about media narratives, about perceived favoritism. None of it had spilled into the public in concrete detail. But those inside the league knew that emotions were simmering. The shove wasn't an isolated lightning strike out of a clear sky. It was the spark that landed in a room already filled with fumes. When the decision was announced, reactions poured in from every corner of the basketball world. Some argued that the punishment was too harsh, that physical play has always been part of the sport. Others insisted that the league had no choice. With so many new eyes watching, with sponsors investing at record levels, with broadcast partners banking on continued growth, the WNBA could not afford images that suggested chaos or hostility overshadowing the game itself. Protecting players, especially those who had become central to the league's visibility, was not just about fairness. It was about stability. What made the moment even more complex was Clark's response. She didn't lash out publicly. She didn't call for punishment. She did what she had done all season. She got up, refocused, and kept playing. That composure amplified the contrast. The narrative shifted from a heated rivalry to a question of professionalism. In an era where every reaction is clipped, captioned, and shared within seconds, Clark's restraint only magnified the scrutiny placed on Carter. For Chicago, the fallout was immediate and painful. A roster that had been trying to find consistency was suddenly facing not just a competitive challenge, but a reputational one. Teammates were asked questions they couldn't fully answer. Coaches were pressed to comment on matters that extended beyond strategy. The organization had to recalibrate on the fly. Meanwhile, Indiana's momentum grew. The incident, while alarming, underscored just how disruptive Clark's presence had become. Opponents weren't just game planning for her. They were feeling the pressure of her impact in ways that went beyond box scores. The Fever's games became must-watch events. Ticket demand spiked even higher. Debate shows dissected every angle of the shove, every frame of the replay, every line of the league statement. But beneath the headlines, there was a larger shift taking place. The WNBA's action signaled that its growth phase would not come at the expense of its standards. Physicality would remain part of the sport, but intent mattered. Context mattered. Image mattered. The league was no longer operating in survival mode. It was operating from a position of strength, and strength allows for decisive boundaries. Players around the league felt it. Conversations in locker rooms grew more reflective. Veterans who had once prided themselves on setting a hard tone began emphasizing composure. Younger players watched closely, understanding that the margin for error had narrowed in a high-visibility era. The message was clear. Talent opens doors, but professionalism keeps them open. And so, what began as a single shove became a defining chapter in the league's evolution. It wasn't just about Carter. It wasn't even just about Clark. It was about a league stepping into a new identity, one where the stakes are higher, the spotlight is brighter, and the consequences are more immediate than ever before. In the weeks that followed, every Fever Sky matchup carried added electricity, not because of animosity, but because of awareness. Fans understood that they were witnessing a turning point. Analysts spoke about it as a cultural inflection point. Executives quietly acknowledged that the league had crossed into a different tier of relevance. Shan Carter's 6-second decision will likely be replayed for years, not simply as an example of misconduct, but as a case study in timing.
4-second inbound play. Gray looking for an opening. Lofts it up.
In another era, perhaps it would have resulted in a suspension and a fine. In this era, an era defined by rapid expansion, corporate partnerships, and record-breaking viewership, it triggered something far more permanent. The shove that stopped the league did more than interrupt a possession. It forced a reckoning. It clarified priorities. It drew a line. And for better or worse, it ensured that the WNBA's new chapter would be written with a sharper pen and stricter standards than ever before. In 15 years of covering women's basketball, analysts have witnessed everything the sport has to offer. Hard fouls in the paint, playoff tempers boiling over, rivalries that spilled into shoving matches, and physical sequences that left players sprawled across the hardwood. Physicality has always been part of the game. It's emotional. It's competitive. It's intense. But what happened that night between Kennedy Carter and Caitlin Clark did not fit into any of those familiar categories. According to one veteran observer who has spent over a decade and a half around the league, there was something unmistakably different about it. There was no basketball purpose.
No strategic justification.
No split-second miscalculation while fighting through a screen. It was not a bang-bang play. It was a choice. And sometimes in sports, the choice is what changes everything. In the seconds after the shove, the arena atmosphere shifted in a way that seasoned reporters immediately recognized. Not outrage. Not chaos. Something heavier. Something final. Carter did not reach down to check on Clark. She did not extend a hand. She did not offer a quick nod of acknowledgement the way players often do even after the most aggressive fouls. There was no eye contact. No moment of pause. She simply turned and walked away as if what had just occurred was routine, a standard exchange in the rhythm of a competitive game. That reaction, or lack of one, became just as significant as the contact itself. Clark, meanwhile, responded in a way that quietly amplified the contrast between the two players. She got up. She brushed off her uniform. She returned to position.
No demonstrative gestures.
No public complaint.
No visible retaliation.
She resumed playing. And in doing so, she sent a message without saying a word. Composure under pressure has a way of reshaping narratives in real time. While Carter's action ignited debate, Clark's restraint intensified it. The difference in demeanor became part of the story, and in a league operating under a brighter spotlight than ever before, those optics mattered. The game continued. Possessions were played. Time expired. A final score was recorded. But long before the buzzer sounded, something irreversible had already been set into motion. The WNBA had seen the footage. The broadcast cameras had captured every angle. Social media had already begun circulating clips in slow motion. And within league headquarters, discussions were happening that Carter likely never anticipated. Her clock, metaphorically speaking, had started counting down. She just didn't know it yet. When the league office released its official statement, the tone was strikingly direct. Professional sports organizations are typically careful with wording. They rely on phrases like conduct detrimental, unsportsmanlike behavior, or violation of league standards. But this statement did not soften its language. Carter's actions were described as deliberate and inconsistent with the values of professional basketball. That phrasing carried weight. It signaled that the league viewed this not as an emotional lapse in the heat of competition, but as something more serious, something that crossed a philosophical boundary. Initially, a flagrant foul designation was confirmed following league review. But that was only the beginning. What followed was an announcement that stunned many insiders, an indefinite suspension with conditions for reinstatement. At first glance, conditions for reinstatement sounds procedural. Standard. Leagues suspend players all the time. There are appeals. There are mandatory programs. There are fines. There are timelines. But multiple sources familiar with the internal deliberations suggested that this situation was different.
Having herself a game. Knocks down.
The conditions attached to Carter's potential return were, by design, extraordinarily difficult to fulfill. This was not a brief cooling-off period. It was not a temporary disciplinary measure with a predictable end date circled on the calendar. The suspension functioned in practical terms as a ban, without formally using that word. Why does that distinction matter? Because permanent bans in professional sports can invite legal scrutiny and union challenges. By structuring the discipline as indefinite with rigorous reinstatement requirements, the league created a framework that protected itself procedurally while still achieving the outcome it appeared to want. Carter removed from competition. The requirements were extensive. Reports indicated more than 500 hours of mandated community service. To put that in perspective, 500 hours is the equivalent of working full-time for over 3 months without a single day off. For a professional athlete who must maintain elite conditioning, train daily, and remain game-ready, that kind of time commitment becomes logistically overwhelming. Add to that comprehensive behavioral evaluations with no clearly defined endpoint. Unlike a fixed suspension of 10 or 20 games, these assessments were open-ended, contingent upon subjective approval processes rather than objective benchmarks. Even if every requirement were completed, there was reportedly a restrictive probationary phase attached to any potential return, limitations on movement, earning structures, and contract flexibility. In essence, the pathway back was so narrow and so uncertain that insiders described it as symbolic rather than realistic. One senior team executive, speaking off the record, summarized it bluntly. This wasn't discipline designed for rehabilitation. It was career execution, just without the headline of a formal expulsion. The financial consequences were immediate and severe. When fans hear the word suspension, they often think of missed games and forfeited salary. But in today's WNBA, where endorsement growth has accelerated alongside rising viewership, the economic ripple effects extend far beyond a base contract. Carter's guaranteed salary was only the starting point. Within days of the announcement, brands that had been in active negotiations reportedly withdrew from discussions. Endorsement deals didn't simply pause, they evaporated. That shift is significant because women's basketball is in a pivotal commercial phase. Players are finally attracting major sponsorship dollars, national advertising campaigns, and cross-industry partnerships. For many athletes, endorsement income now rivals or exceeds on-court earnings. When that pipeline closes, the damage compounds quickly. Lost salary becomes lost visibility. Lost visibility becomes lost leverage. And lost leverage becomes diminished long-term opportunity. Industry projections estimated the financial impact could exceed $1.2 million when combining voided contracts, withdrawn endorsements, and projected future earnings. Some estimates ran even higher when factoring in long-term brand partnerships that would likely never materialize. In a league where average salaries are significantly lower than those of NBA counterparts, that kind of loss is not just a setback. It is potentially career-ending. Beyond immediate income, there are reputational consequences that linger. Post-career opportunities in coaching, broadcasting, or player development often depend on perception as much as resume. Organizations evaluating candidates consider leadership qualities, professionalism, and public image. A high-profile disciplinary action attached to a player's name can become a permanent footnote that influences hiring decisions years later. Meanwhile, the broader league ecosystem absorbed the message. The WNBA's rapid growth has brought new scrutiny. With increased television deals, record attendance, and expanding corporate partnerships, the margin for reputational risk has narrowed. League leadership appears determined to protect both its players and its image during this expansion phase. The discipline imposed on Carter signaled that maintaining control over the league's narrative was non-negotiable. For Clark, the incident paradoxically reinforced her symbolic role in this new era. As one of the most visible figures in the sport, her presence represents not only competitive excellence, but commercial momentum. The league's response underscored an understanding that safeguarding its most marketable stars aligns with safeguarding its broader economic trajectory.
For an opening, lofts it up.
Yet the situation also sparked debate among fans and commentators. Some argued that the punishment was disproportionate. Basketball is emotional, they said. Rivalries are intense. Physical play is part of the tradition. Others countered that intent matters and that drawing a firm line now prevents future escalations. In an era where every moment is captured in high definition and distributed globally within seconds, the league's tolerance threshold is inevitably lower than it once was. Inside locker rooms, conversations reportedly shifted. Veterans emphasized composure. Younger players recognized that the spotlight leaves little room for impulsive decisions. The incident became a cautionary tale discussed not only in team meetings, but across training facilities and front offices. Ultimately, what unfolded after that shove was not merely a disciplinary process. It was a reflection of a league redefining its boundaries during a transformative period. Carter's actions lasted seconds. The consequences will last years. And as the WNBA continues its ascent, the episode stands as a stark reminder that in today's environment, every decision, every movement, carries amplified weight. What began as a single moment in a regular season game evolved into a financial, professional, and cultural turning point. For Carter, it reshaped a career trajectory. For the league, it clarified priorities. And for fans watching from packed arenas and national broadcasts, it reinforced a reality of modern sports. The spotlight is brighter than ever, and under that light, even one decision can change everything.
Long shot by McBride.
No hesitation from McBride to the...
And in a league like the WNBA, every contract matters. Every roster spot matters. Every dollar carries weight in ways that fans of larger leagues sometimes struggle to fully grasp. So, when a punishment of this magnitude comes down, the real question isn't simply whether it was too harsh. The deeper question, the one that hasn't been asked loudly enough, is whether that single shove was truly the reason. Or was it merely the final piece of a much longer puzzle? The last visible incident that gave the league justification to act on concerns that had been building quietly for years? Because discipline this precise, this structured, this airtight, it doesn't get assembled overnight. It gets assembled when an organization has been watching closely for a very long time. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to 2019. The Atlanta Dream selected Kennedy Carter as the 4th overall pick in the WNBA draft. On draft night, it looked like the beginning of something electric. Carter entered the league with undeniable talent, elite first-step quickness, explosive scoring ability, defensive intensity that could rattle opposing guards. She was the kind of player coaches dream about building around. Dynamic, fearless, marketable. The Dream fan base was energized. The front office believed they had secured a foundational piece. On paper, everything pointed forward. But within months, internal conversations reportedly began shifting tone. What started as competitive fire was, according to those familiar with the situation, becoming something harder to manage. A locker room confrontation between Carter and Courtney Williams escalated to a level that shook the organization. And that detail matters more than it might initially seem. Williams has long been viewed around the league as one of its most even-tempered, positive personalities. Teammates describe her as steady. Coaches describe her as coachable. She is not known for drama. She is not associated with volatility. So when tensions between her and Carter nearly crossed into physical territory, it wasn't dismissed as normal teammate friction. According to a former staff member, it was the kind of conflict that fractures trust from the inside out. When a situation reaches that point with a respected veteran presence, it doesn't stay contained. It ripples. Coaches start adjusting practice structures. Front office executives start reevaluating long-term plans. Teammates become cautious in communication. Chemistry, once disrupted, doesn't easily snap back into place. Carter's tenure in Atlanta ended sooner than many expected. A fresh start followed with the Los Angeles Sparks. New city, new coaching staff, new system, a clean slate. Professional sports are filled with redemption arcs built on second chances. Different environments can unlock different versions of players. Sometimes personalities clash in one locker room but thrive in another. Every ingredient for a reset appeared to be present. But according to multiple accounts that circulated quietly among league insiders, the pattern did not fully disappear. Film sessions, often the most important yet least glamorous part of professional basketball, became flashpoints. These sessions are where trust is built, where accountability is reinforced, where players and coaches dissect reads, rotations, and decision-making. Interruptions reportedly became frequent. Tactical feedback was challenged publicly. Meetings ended abruptly. What might have initially been viewed as passionate disagreement reportedly evolved into a recurring dynamic the organization had to navigate carefully. The Sparks tried adjustments. They managed personalities. They worked to maintain cohesion. But eventually, they reached a decision that still surprises many when discussed privately. They paid Carter approximately $90,000, nearly a third of their available salary cap at the time, not for performance incentives, not as part of a blockbuster trade, but effectively to move on. In a league where players sometimes accept reduced salaries to stay competitive, where every dollar is calculated strategically, that figure speaks volumes. That wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a declaration that the cost of keeping the situation unresolved outweighed the cost of walking away. Carter's journey continued with the Chicago Sky. Another opportunity, another locker room, another chance to stabilize her narrative. And this is where the silence becomes deafening. The WNBA has long prided itself on solidarity. Players support one another publicly and privately.
Yo, let's go.
When disciplinary actions occur, teammates often speak up, issuing statements, offering context, defending character. Even players from other teams sometimes lend their voices. It is a culture shaped by shared history, collective advocacy, and mutual respect. After Carter's ban, there was none of that. No public statement from Chicago teammates defending her character. No anonymous quotes suggesting the punishment felt excessive. No subtle gestures of support on social media. Nothing. In most leagues, silence might be interpreted as neutrality. In the WNBA, silence is rarely neutral. It is intentional. It communicates without speaking. Every player in that locker room understood the cultural expectation of solidarity. And yet, the response was complete quiet. That quiet raised questions. Then there was Angel Reese. Throughout the season, Reese and Carter appeared to have developed a visible connection. They were photographed together at team events. They interacted playfully in interviews. Their camaraderie seemed genuine, not just the polite professionalism of coworkers, but a bond that fans interpreted as authentic friendship. Social media amplified it. Commentators noted it. It looked real. Within hours of the shove incident, Reese unfollowed Carter across social platforms.
No announcement.
No cryptic message. No emotional post. Just a clean digital break. In the modern sports landscape, social media actions carry symbolic weight. Unfollowing someone publicly, especially when a relationship had been visible, is rarely accidental. Reese did not have to make that move publicly. She could have muted quietly. She could have stayed neutral. Instead, the separation was unmistakable. That action spoke volumes precisely because it wasn't accompanied by explanation. When you layer all of these elements together, the Atlanta confrontation, the Los Angeles payout, the Chicago silence, the sudden social media distancing, the narrative becomes more complex than a single shove in a single game. It begins to resemble a pattern observed quietly over multiple seasons, which circles back to the original question. Was the shove the cause, or was it the catalyst? Organizations rarely act decisively based on one isolated incident unless that incident fits into a broader context. When a league issues a suspension structured so meticulously that it functions almost as a permanent removal, it suggests preparation. It suggests documentation. It suggests accumulated concern. That doesn't erase individual responsibility for the moment itself, but it reframes it. Instead of viewing the punishment as reactive, some insiders see it as the culmination of years of internal evaluations finally converging at a point of public visibility. Meanwhile, the league's growth adds another layer. With record-breaking viewership, expanding sponsorship deals, and increasing national attention, the margin for reputational risk is thinner than ever. The arrival of high-profile stars like Caitlin Clark has accelerated that growth dramatically. Every nationally televised game becomes a showcase. Every viral clip shapes perception. In that environment, the tolerance threshold for repeated instability shrinks. Contracts matter. Chemistry matters. Brand image matters. And when those factors intersect with a public incident that captures national headlines, decisions become less about one play and more about long-term direction. Perhaps the most telling element remains the collective response, or lack thereof, from those closest to the situation. Teammates speak when they believe injustice has occurred. They rally when they believe a colleague deserves defense. In this case, the rally never came. Silence can be louder than outrage. Social media can be louder than press conferences. And sometimes, the most powerful statement is the one that isn't spoken at all. If this was merely about one shove, the aftermath would likely have felt different. Instead, it felt like a chapter closing, one that had been drafted long before the final sentence was written on that hardwood floor. In professional sports, talent opens doors. But sustained opportunity depends on trust. Trust between teammates, between players and coaches, between organizations and the league office. When that trust erodes over time, the breaking point rarely arrives with warning. It arrives with a moment. And when that moment comes, it doesn't just change a game. It can change a career.
It was good. So the first half comes to an...
She could have created distance quietly. In today's sports world, players unfollow one another all the time without headlines forming. It happens gradually, subtly, almost invisibly. Weeks can pass before anyone notices. But this wasn't gradual. This wasn't subtle. When Angel Reese unfollowed Kennedy Carter, it happened quickly enough, and visibly enough, that it registered almost immediately. Whether that timing was intentional or purely emotional in the moment hardly matters now. The effect was undeniable. Without issuing a statement, without posting a caption, without saying a single word, Reese communicated exactly where she stood. And in the WNBA, silence, or in this case, digital separation, speaks loudly. What makes it even more compelling is that the social media activity leading up to the incident had already been hinting at something beneath the surface. Subtle unfollows within the team. Cryptic posts from players about respecting the game, understanding roles, embracing accountability. Carter's name noticeably absent from team bonding content that featured nearly every other member of the Chicago Sky roster. Individually, each of these details could be dismissed. Social media is messy. Algorithms hide things. Posts get overlooked. But collectively, they form a pattern. And patterns are rarely accidental. Taken together, those signals painted the picture of a locker room that had been quietly pulling away long before the night in Indiana. These were not public confrontations. There were no dramatic press conferences exposing internal rifts. Nothing leaked in obvious fashion. But chemistry isn't measured only by what is said publicly. It's revealed in what isn't shared, in who isn't tagged, in who isn't included. By the time the shove happened, the fracture may have already been there. Then came the 30 seconds that could have changed everything. Because here's the truth. Careers in professional sports don't always hinge on a single physical act. They hinge on response, on accountability, on growth in real time. 30 seconds. That's all it might have taken. A simple acknowledgement, a direct apology, a moment of humility. I crossed a line. That wasn't necessary. I'll learn from it. Those words don't erase actions, but they reshape consequences. Carter had that opportunity at the post-game press conference. She walked in with her arms crossed, body language closed, eyes rolling before questions were even finished. Audible sighs caught clearly by the microphone. When asked directly about the incident involving Caitlin Clark, Carter deflected. She said she was focused on the next opponent. She described the shove as just basketball. It happened. It's over. I don't know why we're dragging it. The room shifted. It was a different kind of quiet than the one inside the arena. This wasn't shock. It was recognition. Recognition that the moment required reflection, and reflection wasn't coming. When pressed further about whether she regretted not addressing it immediately, Carter doubled down.
No regrets.
For league executives already reviewing footage and weighing disciplinary action within the WNBA, that press conference likely confirmed their deepest concern. Not simply that a shove had occurred, but that the player involved did not appear to grasp why it mattered. Professional sports organizations can manage mistakes. They can work with passion. They can coach intensity. What they struggle to rehabilitate is the absence of accountability. One veteran media member summarized it bluntly: "It felt like watching a career unravel in real time. Not because of the shove alone, but because of the refusal to meet the moment with growth." The decision from the league came shortly after. And to those who watched that press conference closely, it wasn't surprising. So, what is left for Carter now? The WNBA door appears closed. But the basketball world is bigger than one league. International options exist. European teams have historically recruited American talent aggressively. Overseas contracts have revived careers before. That was the landscape 5 years ago. It is not the same landscape today. International organizations have become increasingly selective.
Big-time male athletes, NBA teams, NFL teams.
Talent remains essential, but it is no longer sufficient. Chemistry matters. Professionalism matters. Character evaluations carry weight alongside scoring averages and athleticism. One international agent representing multiple current and former WNBA players described the shift clearly. 5 years ago, talent could overshadow baggage. That is no longer the case. For Carter, the challenge is compounded. A highly publicized disciplinary action. A documented history across multiple organizations. A press conference that circulated widely for the wrong reasons. These are not details that disappear from search results. They become part of a permanent professional profile. Endorsement opportunities evaporated quickly. Brands that had reportedly been in advanced negotiation stages withdrew. Marketing teams assess risk meticulously. Association matters. And when a player's name becomes linked to controversy without visible accountability, that risk calculation changes. When analysts attempt to quantify the financial divergence between Carter's projected career trajectory and her current outlook, the numbers are staggering. Contracts that might have been signed. Sponsorship deals that likely would have followed. Post-playing opportunities in coaching, broadcasting, or player development. Some estimates place the long-term earnings gap north of $4 million. She is only 25. She possessed elite tools, explosive acceleration, scoring creativity, defensive intensity that can't be taught. All-star potential was not unrealistic speculation. It was plausible. The physical gifts were there. The opportunity was there. What stood in the way wasn't injury. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a lack of skill. It was choice. And choices, unlike injuries, do not heal on their own. You cannot tell the story without acknowledging Clark, not because she was the victim, but because of how she handled the aftermath. Clark entered the league under unprecedented pressure. Historic media attention. Record-breaking viewership. Expectations that would overwhelm most rookies. Then, on national television, she was shoved to the floor. Her response? She played. In interviews, she redirected attention back to basketball, back to team goals, back to improvement. No public escalation. No inflammatory comments. No emotional soundbites designed for viral clips. When reporters attempted to extend the controversy, she pivoted. Focused.
Composed.
A former WNBA All-Star noted something essential in that poise. Leadership reveals itself under pressure. You cannot manufacture it in calmer moments. It surfaces when tested. The contrast between the two responses became impossible to ignore. One player lowered the temperature. The other appeared to resist reflection. In a league experiencing historic growth, 87% year-over-year viewership increases, merchandise sales reaching unprecedented highs, the optics mattered. Clark is a significant catalyst for that growth. The league understands that. When it delivered one of the strongest disciplinary messages in recent memory, it was not just responding to an incident. It was reinforcing the culture it wants to build moving forward. This was not solely about protecting one player. It was about defining standards for all players. Kennedy Carter had undeniable talent. A first-step defenders struggled to contain. Finishing ability that should have translated into sustained production. Defensive instincts coaches value deeply. But talent without accountability becomes unstable. Like a high-performance vehicle without steering control, impressive in bursts, but ultimately unsustainable. The league drew a line, not only for Carter, for everyone watching. Talent opens doors. Professionalism keeps them open. Carter's story will likely be shared in future locker rooms, not framed merely as a shove in a regular season game, but as a cautionary example about growth, accountability, and timing. The WNBA continues moving forward, capitalizing on momentum, expanding its reach, strengthening its brand. Whether Carter finds a path forward, whether through personal reflection, international opportunity, or eventual reconciliation with the professional standards expected at this level, that chapter is still unwritten. But this much is clear. In today's spotlight, every action carries amplified consequence. And sometimes, the difference between longevity and loss is not measured in talent, but in 30 seconds of accountability.